History often remembers the roar of the victor, but it rarely records the whisper that saved a kingdom. In the high-stakes world of the North American werewolf packs, power is usually measured in blood and teeth. But on a freezing December night at the Mercer estate, the fate of the Alpha King didn't rest on his strength, but on the nose of a rankless girl nobody knew existed. One glass of poisoned champagne, one brother's betrayal, and a scent of bitter almonds hidden beneath expensive cologne changed everything. This isn't a fairy tale about a prince finding a princess. This is the brutal, true account of how Sophie Wren, a shy omega, with a secret stepped out of the shadows to rewrite history. The grand ballroom of the Oakhaven Hotel in Chicago was suffocating despite the sub-zero temperatures outside. It was the annual Winter Solstice Gala, a mandatory gathering for the ruling families of the werewolf hierarchy. To the human staff working the event, it was just another gathering of eccentric billionaires. To the 300 guests inside it was a political minefield. Sophie Wren adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform. As an omega from the dissolved River Run pack, she was technically a guest, but socially, she was invisible. Her pack had been absorbed by the ruling Mercer clan years ago, due to debt leaving her with no status and no protection. She wasn't waiting tables because she had to. She was doing it because blending in with the staff was safer than trying to mingle with the wolves who viewed her as a plaything. Standing near the heavy velvet curtains of the service entrance, Sophie scanned the room. The air was thick with pheromones, dominance, lust, aggression, and the metallic tang of anxiety. It was a sensory overload that usually gave her a migraine, but tonight something sharper cut through the haze. Declan Mercer entered the room. The music didn't stop, but the atmosphere shifted instantly. Declan, the Alpha King of the Midwest Alliance, moved with the predatory grace of an apex predator who knew he had no natural enemies. He was tall, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Sophie's entire life earnings. His jaw was set, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with bored detachment. He was 32, unmarried, and rumors said he was looking for a mate. But Sophie knew better. Men like Declan didn't look for mates at parties. They looked for alliances. "Trey," the floor manager hissed at Sophie, shoving a silver platter of champagne flutes into her hands. "Section 4, move." Sophie kept her head down, navigating the sea of silk dresses and Italian wool suits. She was a ghost in the machine. No one looked at her face. They only saw the tray. As she approached the center of the room, where Declan stood, surrounded by his inner circle, the scent hit her. It wasn't the musky cologne of the Alphas or the floral perfume of the Lunas. It was chemical, acrid, sweet like rotting fruit and crushed almonds. Sophie froze. Her wolf, usually dormant and timid, bristled beneath her skin. Cyanide, or perhaps a magical derivative nightshade laced with wolfsbane. She scanned the immediate area. Declan was laughing at a joke made by Lucian Graves, his second-in-command and childhood friend. Lucian held a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir, pouring it into a fresh glass held by a server. The scent wasn't coming from the bottle. It was coming from the glass itself. Sophie watched in slow motion as the server handed the glass to Declan. The Alpha King took it by the stem, raising it for a toast. The room quieted down. "To unity." Declan's deep voice boomed, resonating in Sophie's chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If she spoke, she would be punished for interrupting an alpha. If she screamed, security would tackle her before she got a word out. She was an omega. Her word meant nothing against the hierarchy. But as Declan brought the rim to his lips, the acrid smell spiked, burning Sophie's nostrils. She didn't think. She reacted. Sophie surged forward, feigning a stumble. She collided hard with a massive beta guard standing near the circle, using the momentum to propel herself toward the king. "Watch it," the guard snarled. Sophie didn't stop. She crashed into Declan's arm just as the glass touched his lips. The movement was clumsy, desperate. The red wine splashed violently across Declan's pristine white shirt and onto the expensive floor. The glass shattered with a deafening crack. Silence descended on the ballroom. It was the kind of silence that preceded a massacre. Declan stood, frozen red wine dripping from his chest like a fresh wound. He looked down, his eyes turning amber, the sign of his wolf surfacing in rage. He slowly turned his gaze to the trembling girl in the waitress uniform, who was now sprawled on the floor amidst the shards. "You clumsy little wretch!" Lucian Graves snarled, stepping forward, his hand raised to strike her. Sophie flinched, curling into a ball. "I'm so sorry, Alpha." "Leave her." Declan's voice was low, deadly calm. He wiped a drop of wine from his chin. "Get up." Sophie scrambled to her feet, keeping her eyes on his shoes. "Alpha Mercer, Look at me," he commanded. She forced her chin up. Her hazel eyes met his furious amber ones. The power radiating off him was enough to make her knees buckle. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't have you thrown out into the snow right now." Declan said, his voice devoid of emotion. Sophie stepped closer, invading his personal space, a crime punishable by imprisonment. She went up on her toes. The beta guards tensed, ready to rip her throat out, but Declan held up a hand to stop them. He was curious. The fear in her scent was genuine, but there was something else, determination. She leaned in her lips, brushing his ear, and whispered 3 words that would shatter his reality. "Smell the glass." She pulled back, her eyes wide and pleading. Declan frowned. He looked at the shattered remains of the crystal flute on the floor. He was an alpha. His senses were acute, but the room was filled with the smell of spilled wine and perfume. However, now that she had said it, he focused. He pushed past the alcohol and the anger. There it was. Faint, almost imperceptible. The chemical burn of concentrated wolfsbane residue on the shards. He looked back at the girl, but she was already backing away, fading into the crowd of terrified staff. "Lucian!" Declan said, his voice changing tone. It wasn't angry anymore. It was cold steel. "I'll handle her, Declan," Lucian said, signaling security. "Take her to the back alley and teach her a lesson about respect." "No," Declan said sharply. "Lucian, bring the car around. We are leaving. Now." "But the toast." "Now." Declan roared the alpha command, slamming into everyone in the vicinity. As the entourage scrambled, Declan scanned the room for the girl with the hazel eyes. But Sophie Wren was gone. Sophie didn't go to the staff locker room. She didn't go to the bus stop. She ran. She knew too much. The moment she whispered that warning, she had painted a target on her back. If the poison had been on the glass, it meant the killer had access to the kitchen or the service staff. Or worse, the killer was someone standing right next to Declan. She burst out of the kitchen's loading dock into the biting Chicago wind. The snow was falling in thick sheets, masking the grime of the alleyway. She wore only her thin uniform and a stolen wool cardigan she'd grabbed from a hook by the door. She needed to get to the subway. If she could get to the south side, she could hide with her cousin, a rogue who lived off the grid. But as she reached the end of the alley, a black SUV skidded to a halt, blocking her path. Sophie spun around to run back toward the hotel. But two figures stepped out of the shadows of the loading dock. They weren't hotel security. They were wearing tactical gear, their faces obscured by ski masks. "That's her," one of them said. The voice was mechanical, filtered through a comms device. Sophie bolted toward a dumpster, trying to climb the chain-link fence behind it. She was fast. Omegas had to be fast to survive, but the men were faster. One of them grabbed her ankle, yanking her down. She hit the icy pavement hard, the air rushing out of her lungs. "Don't kill her yet," the man said, pinning her arms behind her back. "The client wants to know how she knew." Sophie struggled, biting the man's gloved hand. He grunted and backhanded her the blow, stunning her. "Feisty. I like that." Just as they dragged her toward the SUV, the distinct roar of a V8 engine echoed off the brick walls. A sleek silver Aston Martin drifted around the corner, its headlights blinding the attackers. The car didn't slow down. It accelerated. The men holding Sophie released her and dove out of the way as the Aston Martin slammed into the black SUV, crunching metal and shattering glass. The impact shook the ground. The driver's side door of the sports car flew open. Declan Mercer stepped out. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore. His white shirt was stained with wine and rolled up to the elbows, revealing muscular forearms covered in tattoos, and he was holding a handgun. Modern wolves respected the claw, but they weren't stupid enough to ignore the gun. "Get behind me," Declan ordered, not looking at Sophie. Sophie scrambled across the ice, hiding behind the open door of the Aston Martin. The two attackers recovered quickly. They shifted. The sound of cracking bones and tearing fabric filled the alley as they transformed into large grey timber wolves. They lunged at Declan. Declan didn't shift. He fired 3 shots with terrifying precision. 2 hit the first wolf in the shoulder, slowing it down. The second wolf leaped for his throat. Declan dropped the gun, caught the wolf in mid-air by the throat with one hand, and slammed it into the pavement with a force that cracked the concrete. His eyes glowed a brilliant, terrifying gold. He let out a roar that wasn't human, a sound that made the windows of the nearby buildings rattle. The alpha aura rolled off him in waves so potent that the second wolf, the one he had shot, whimpered and backed away, submitting instantly despite its orders. Declan snapped the neck of the wolf he was holding. It was brutal, efficient, and silent. The remaining wolf turned and fled into the night. Declan stood panting, his chest heaving. He wiped blood, not his own, from his hands. He turned to look at Sophie. She was shivering violently, partly from the cold, partly from the shock of seeing the Alpha King kill with his bare hands. "You have a death wish, Omega?" he asked, his voice raspy. "I saved your life," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "And now I've saved yours. We're even." He looked at her thin clothes and the bruising forming on her cheek. He sighed, a sound of frustration. "Get in the car." "I can't, I have to go. The men who tried to take you, they aren't common thugs. They are mercenaries from the Red Tooth Syndicate. If you walk away, you'll be dead within the hour." He opened the passenger door. "Get in." Sophie hesitated. Getting in a car with an angry alpha was dangerous. Being left on the street with mercenaries hunting her was fatal. She got in. Declan slid into the driver's seat. The car was wrecked at the front, steam rising from the hood, but the engine was still running. He threw the car into reverse, peeling away from the scene, just as sirens began to wail in the distance. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked, clutching the seatbelt. "My penthouse is compromised. The estate is compromised," Declan said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "If someone poisoned my glass, they have access to my inner circle. I can't trust my security detail." He glanced at her. "What is your name?" "Sophie. Sophie Wren." "Well, Sophie Wren," Declan said, checking the rearview mirror. "Congratulations. You've just been kidnapped by the king." They drove for 2 hours, leaving the city lights far behind. Declan drove like a man possessed, constantly checking his mirrors, taking erratic turns to ensure they weren't being followed. Sophie stayed silent. She watched him. He was sweating despite the car's heater being off. His skin was pale and his breathing was becoming labored. "Are you okay?" she asked tentatively. "I'm fine," he snapped. He wasn't fine. They pulled up a long gravel driveway, deep in the woodlands of Wisconsin. The safe house was a modern cabin made of glass and steel hidden amongst the pines. Declan parked the car and killed the engine. "We stay here until I can contact my brother Bennett. He's the only one I trust," Declan said. He reached for the door handle, but his hand missed. He slumped forward, his head hitting the steering wheel. "Alpha." Sophie unbuckled and reached over. His skin was burning hot. "I didn't drink it." Declan mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "Only a drop on my lip." The poison. Even though he hadn't swallowed the wine, the contact with his mucous membranes had been enough. Wolfsbane was potent, but modified wolfsbane, designed to kill an alpha king, was catastrophic. Sophie ran around to the driver's side. She opened the door and pulled him out. He was dead weight, 200 pounds of muscle. She gritted her teeth, using every ounce of her omega strength to drag him toward the cabin. "Come on, Declan, help me," she pleaded. He groaned, his legs moving sluggishly. They stumbled through the front door. Sophie kicked it shut and let him collapse onto the thick rug in the living room. She needed supplies. She raided the kitchen and the bathroom. She found a first aid kit, bottles of water, and towels. For the next 6 hours, Sophie became a nurse. She stripped him of his ruined shirt. The poison was spreading through his veins, visible as black spiderweb-like veins crawling up his neck. She knew old remedies. Her grandmother had been a healer in the River Run pack before they were wiped out. "Activated charcoal. I need charcoal," she muttered. She found none. She ran to the fireplace, grabbed cold, charred wood, crushed it into a powder, mixed it with water, and forced it down Declan's throat. "Drink," she commanded. He choked, coughing, but swallowed. He thrashed in his fever. He called out names. "Mother, don't. Lucien." "Why?" Sophie paused. "Lucien." The man who had been laughing with him. She used cold towels to bring his temperature down. She sat by his side, wiping his brow, watching the rise and fall of his chest. It was intimate, terrifyingly so. This was the most powerful man in the region, a man who could crush her skull with one hand, and he was completely at her mercy. Around 400 a.m., the thrashing stopped. The black veins began to recede. His breathing deepened into a natural sleep rhythm. Sophie sat back against the couch, exhausted. She pulled her knees to her chest. She looked around the cabin. It was cold, sterile. There were no personal photos, just expensive furniture. She dozed off her head, resting on her knees. She woke to the feeling of a heavy hand on her shoulder. Sophie gasped, jerking awake. Declan was sitting up. He looked terrible. Eyes bloodshot, skin grey. But he was lucid. and he was staring at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You stayed," he said. His voice was a gravelly wreck. "You were dying," Sophie whispered. "Most people would have let me die and stolen the car," Declan said. He winced as he shifted his position. "Why didn't you?" "I'm not a murderer," Sophie said. "And my pack taught me that the Alpha protects the pack. If you die, chaos takes over. War starts. Omegas like me are the first to suffer in war." Declan studied her. He reached out his fingers, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. It was the mate bond. Faint, suppressed, but there. He pulled his hand back as if burned. He felt it too. "Who are you, Sophie Wren?" he asked quietly. "You smell like lavender and rain, and you know how to treat a wolfsbane poisoning that should have killed me." "My grandmother was a healer," she said, looking away. "She taught me to smell sickness. Poisons have a scent. Sickness has a scent. Lies have a scent." Declan's eyes narrowed. "Lies? Can you smell a liar?" "Sometimes, if the lie is big enough, it smells like sulfur." Declan leaned forward. "When we were at the party, before you pushed me, did you smell sulfur?" Sophie hesitated. She remembered the circle of men, the laughter. "Yes," she admitted. "From whom?" "The man pouring the wine," she said. "Lucian." Declan closed his eyes. A look of pure agony crossed his face. "Lucian isn't just my second. He's my cousin. We grew up in the same crib." "I'm sorry," Sophie said. "Don't be." Declan opened his eyes. The gold was back harder this time. "If Lucian wants my crown, he's going to have to come take it." He tried to stand, but stumbled. Sophie caught him. "You're too weak," she insisted. "I need to make a call," he said. "There is a landline in the study. Digital comms are likely tapped." He leaned on her, his arm draped over her shoulders. The heat radiating between them was distracting, but the stakes were too high to focus on attraction. They made it to the study. Declan picked up the old-fashioned phone and dialed a number from memory. "Bennett," Declan said into the receiver. "It's me. Protocol 0. No, I'm alive." "Barely. Listen to me carefully. Lucian is the leak. I don't care what the evidence says. It was him. I'm at the cabin. Bring the Wolf Guard, and Bennett, bring a doctor, not for me, for the girl who saved me." He hung up. He looked at Sophie. "Help is coming. My brother Bennett runs internal security. He's the only one Lucian can't buy." "What do we do until then?" Sophie asked. Declan walked over to a gun cabinet on the wall. He punched in a code and the glass door clicked open. He pulled out a semi-automatic rifle and checked the chamber. "We wait," Declan said, moving to the window and peering out into the snowy darkness. "And we pray that Lucian doesn't know about this cabin." As if on cue, the single light bulb on the porch shattered. Sophie screamed as a bullet tore through the window, embedding itself in the wall inches from Declan's head. "Get down!" Declan tackled her to the floor as a hail of gunfire erupted from the tree line. They weren't waiting anymore. The war had come to them. The cabin erupted into chaos. Glass shattered inward, raining down like deadly confetti. Bullets chewed through the drywall, sending plumes of white dust into the air, choking the already tense atmosphere. Declan moved with a speed that defied his poisoned state. He dragged Sophie behind the heavy oak sofa, flipping it onto its back to create a makeshift barricade. The cushions exploded as rounds slammed into them. "Stay down," Declan roared over the noise. He popped up, firing 3 controlled bursts through the broken window. A scream from outside confirmed a hit. "How many?" Sophie asked, her hands covering her ears, trembling violently. "At least 6, maybe 8. They're flanking," Declan said, his jaw tight. He checked his ammunition. "We can't hold this position. They'll torch the place." The smell hit Sophie before the sight did. Gasoline. "They're already doing it," she choked out. "The back porch." Smoke began to curl under the kitchen door. The mercenaries weren't trying to capture them. This was an extermination. Declan looked at Sophie. His golden eyes were fierce, burning away the lingering sickness. "Do you trust me?" "I don't have a choice," she retorted, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Good answer." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a closet near the fireplace. He shoved aside coats and kicked at the floorboards. A hidden trap door revealed itself. "Tunnel," Declan explained, pulling it open. "It leads to the root cellar of the old farmhouse about 200 yards into the tree line. Go." Sophie dropped into the darkness. It was narrow, smelling of damp earth and decay. Declan followed, closing the trap door, just as the front door of the cabin was kicked in. They heard heavy boots on the hardwood above them, followed by the whoosh of an accelerant catching fire. They crawled in near-total darkness, the heat from the burning cabin above radiating down through the soil. Sophie's knees scraped against rocks, but she didn't slow down. The sounds of the fire grew muffled, replaced by the terrifying silence of the underground. They burst out into the freezing root cellar, coughing up smoke. Declan didn't let them rest. He kicked open the cellar doors, and the bitter Wisconsin winter hit them like a physical blow. The snow was knee-deep. "They'll see the tracks," Sophie whispered, shivering immediately in her thin waitress uniform. "We have to make it to the ridgeline," Declan said, pointing to a dark silhouette of hills against the night sky. "The wind is harder there. It'll cover our trail. Move, Sophie. If you stop, you freeze." They ran. It was a brutal, agonizing slog. The snow sucked at their legs, and the icy air burned their lungs. Declan, still recovering from a lethal dose of wolfsbane, was lagging. His regenerative abilities were fighting a war on 2 fronts, the poison and the extreme elements. Sophie heard him stumble behind her. She turned. The Alpha King was on one knee in the snow, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. His skin was practically blue. "Declan." She trudged back to him. "Go," he wheezed. "They're tracking us. I hear them. Leave me. I'll slow them down." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "That's an order, Omega." "I'm not in your pack," she snapped, grabbing his arm and hauling him upward with surprising strength. "Your orders don't mean anything to me right now. You owe me a life debt, Declan Mercer. You don't get to die until it's paid." He looked at her, startled by the fire in her tone. The timid girl from the ballroom was gone, replaced by something forged in adrenaline and desperation. He grunted, using her shoulder for support. They continued. A shot rang out, echoing through the silent pines. Bark exploded on a tree, inches from Sophie's head. "Down!" Declan shoved her behind a fallen log. 50 yards back, 3 figures in white tactical gear emerged from the trees, rifles raised. The moonlight glinted off their scopes. Declan raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking too badly from the cold and the toxin. He fired, missing wide. "Damn it!" he snarled. "They're scent tracking us," Sophie whispered, pressing herself into the snow. The wind shifted. It's blowing toward them. She closed her eyes, focusing. The forest smelled of pine needles, ice, and the metallic tang of the approaching gunmen. But beneath that, something else. Something pungent and earthy. "Declan," she whispered. "Do you smell that? To the left, about 30 yards over that rise?" He sniffed the air, frowning. "Musk, a bear den. They should be hibernating." "It's fresh," Sophie said. "A rogue grizzly, woken up by the fire and the noise. He's angry." The gunmen were advancing slowly, moving from cover to cover. "I have an idea," Sophie said, her voice trembling but resolute. "But you have to make the shot." "What shot?" "The snowbank above the den. If you hit it right, you can trigger a slide, just enough to expose the entrance." Declan looked at her like she was insane. "You want to wake up a pissed-off grizzly bear in the middle of a firefight. It's them or the bear," she said. "The bear doesn't have a gun." Declan adjusted his grip. He focused, letting his alpha instincts take over, forcing his trembling muscles to still. He aimed not at the men, but at the precarious drift of snow hanging over a rocky outcrop to their left. He fired. The shot hit the snowbank perfectly. A large chunk of compacted snow and ice sheared off, tumbling down the slope and crashing onto the rocks below with a loud thud. A beat of silence. Then a roar tore through the night that made the gunfire seem insignificant. A massive, shaggy shape burst from the exposed den, disoriented and furious. The grizzly, easily 800 pounds, stood on its hind legs and sniffed the air. It smelled the intruders. The mercenaries panicked. Two turned their weapons on the bear, firing wildly. The bear charged. It was pure carnage. The mercenaries were highly trained, but an enraged grizzly in close quarters is a force of nature. Screams replaced gunshots. "Now!" Declan grabbed Sophie's hand. They didn't look back. They sprinted through the snow, the sounds of the mauling spurring them on, until they reached the ridgeline where the howling wind drowned out everything else. They collapsed in the lee of a large boulder, gasping for air. They were alive. Declan looked at Sophie in the moonlight. Her lips were blue, her hair frozen into icicles around her face. He realized with a jolt of terror that she was hypothermic. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, tucking her head under his chin. He unzipped his ruined jacket and wrapped it around both of them, sharing his body heat. "You're crazy," he murmured into her hair. "Brilliant, but absolutely crazy." Sophie didn't answer. She just burrowed closer to the warmth, listening to the steady, powerful beat of the Alpha King's heart. The bond between them, once a faint whisper, was now a steady thrum forged in fire and ice. Morning broke grey and brutal. They had walked for 4 hours along the ridge, guided by Declan's innate sense of direction. They were heading for an old logging outpost that Bennett used as an emergency cache. When they arrived, the small cabin was already occupied. The door flew open as they approached, and Bennett Mercer Declan's younger brother stood there with a shotgun leveled at them. Behind him were 4 members of the elite Wolf Guard. "Drop it, Declan." Bennett warned, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and suspicion. "It's me, you idiot," Declan growled, too tired for games. Bennett lowered the weapon, rushing forward to embrace his brother. "We thought you were dead. The hotel said you left with Lucian, then reports came in of a hit, and the cabin burned down hours ago." Bennett pulled back his gaze, landing hard on Sophie. He stepped between her and Declan, his posture defensive. "Who is this? Why is she wearing a waitress uniform?" "She's with me," Declan said, stepping around his brother to stand next to Sophie. He put a possessive hand on the small of her back. "She saved my life," Twice. Bennett narrowed his eyes, sniffing the air near Sophie. She's an Omega. River-run scent markers, but old. She's a nobody, Declan. This screams setup. Lucian uses Omegas as spies all the time, because no one pays attention to them. Watch your tone, Bennett. Declan's voice dropped an octave, the Alpha command lacing his words. The guards behind Bennett flinched. Her name is Sophie, and if it wasn't for her nose, I'd be a corpse on the ballroom floor right now. She smelled the wolfsbane on the glass. Bennett looked from Declan to Sophie, stunned. Smelled it? That's impossible. The new synthetic strains are odorless. Not to her, Declan said. They moved inside the cabin. It was stocked with MRE's weapons and tactical gear. Sophie was given warm clothes, oversized military fatigues, and a cup of hot coffee that tasted like heaven. Bennett laid out a topographic map on the table. The atmosphere changed from reunion to war council. It's worse than you think, Dec, Bennett said, running a hand through his hair. Lucian isn't working alone. We intercepted encrypted comms after the attack on the cabin failed. He's brokered a deal with the Eastern European Coalition. Declan slammed his fist onto the table. The Coalition. They're butchers. They want to destabilize the North American packs to move in on our territory. Exactly, Bennett said. Lucian promised them the Midwest Alliance in exchange for being installed as the puppet king. He's claiming you've gone unstable, that you attacked him at the party in a drunken rage and fled with a hostage. He's spinning a narrative that you are unfit to rule. Sophie listened horrified. The scale of the betrayal was massive. He's called an emergency summit of the regional alphas tonight, Bennett continued. At the estate. He plans to have the council formally strip you of your title in absentia and swear fealty to him before the coalition troops arrive tomorrow. We have to stop that vote, Declan said coldly. How? Bennett asked. We have 5 guards. Lucian has the entire estate security force, plus whatever mercenaries he has left. It's a fortress. We don't need an army. Declan looked at Sophie. We need the truth. They won't believe us without proof, Bennett argued. It's your word against his, and he has the home field advantage. We get the proof, Declan said. Lucian is arrogant. He keeps records of everything as insurance. If he's dealing with the coalition, he has a contract somewhere in his private vault. The vault is in the sub-basement of the main house, Bennett said. It's biometric. Only you and Lucian can open it, and to get there you have to go through the heart of the estate. Then we go in tonight, Declan decided. It's suicide, Bennett protested. He looked at Sophie. And what about her? We can't take a civilian into a hot zone. She's not a civilian, Declan said, his eyes meeting Sophie's. She's my mate. The room went dead silent. Bennett dropped his coffee cup. Sophie stared at Declan. He hadn't asked her. They hadn't discussed it. But as the words left his mouth, she felt the truth of it settle in her soul, like a heavy, comforting weight. The bond flared undeniable now. Declan, she started. I know, he said softly to her. It's not how I wanted this to happen, but I won't hide it, and I won't leave you behind. He turned back to Bennett. She has abilities we need. She can smell things we can't. Traps, lies, accelerants. She's coming. Bennett looked at Sophie with new eyes, calculating, respectful and still slightly terrified. Okay, if the king says she's queen, then she's queen. But if we get caught, Lucian won't just kill us. He'll make it a spectacle. Declan picked up a combat knife and sheathed it at his belt. He can try. The Mercer estate was less a house and more a sprawling compound built into the granite cliffs overlooking Lake Michigan. A blizzard was raging, providing the perfect cover for their infiltration. Declan, Bennett, Sophie, and 2 of the guards crept along the perimeter fence. The wind howled, masking the sound of their wire cutters, snapping the electrified mesh. They moved like shadows toward the main house. Sophie walked between Declan and Bennett. The tension radiated off them. Every shadow seemed to hold a mercenary. Drainage tunnel. Declan signaled, pointing to a grate half buried in snow near the foundation. They slipped inside. The tunnels beneath the estate were a maze of pipes and wiring. They led directly to the sub-basement levels where the archives and the vault were located. Sophie led the way. "Left," she whispered at a junction. "There are 2 guards down the right corridor. They smell like menthol cigarettes and boredom." They bypassed patrols using her guidance, moving deeper into the belly of the beast. They reached the vault door, a massive slab of titanium. Declan placed his palm on the scanner. It glowed red, then green. The heavy bolts retracted with a groan that echoed too loudly in the concrete hallway. Inside the vault smelled of old paper and ozone. Declan went straight to a wall safe inside the vault, punching in a secondary code. He pulled out a leather satchel. "Bingo," Bennett whispered, rifling through the papers inside. "Coalition contracts, wire transfers, maps of our defensive grid handed over to them. It's all here. He sold us out for pennies on the dollar." Suddenly, the lights in the vault turned crimson. A siren began to wail, vibrating through the floor. "Trap!" one of the guards yelled. The vault door began to seal. "Move!" Declan grabbed Sophie and shoved her through the narrowing gap. They all tumbled out just as the door slammed shut with finality. "He knew!" Declan snarled. "He was waiting for us to open it." "The vents," Bennett pointed. Gas began to hiss from the ceiling vents. Knockout gas. They ran back the way they came, but heavy steel shutters had dropped over the corridor exits. They were herded forced toward the only open route, a service elevator that led up to the ground floor. The elevator opened into the massive atrium of the estate. It was a soaring space with glass walls looking out onto the cliff edge, known as Obsidian Ridge. The room was full. 50 alphas from the regional packs sat in a semicircle. And standing at the podium, looking entirely unsurprised, was Lucian. He smiled a predatory, triumphant grin. He was flanked by 20 armed mercenaries. "Right on time, cousin," Lucian called out, his voice amplified by a microphone. "I was just telling the council about your tragic mental decline. And look, you brought your hostage." Declan stepped out of the elevator, pulling Sophie close to his side. He looked every inch the king, despite his torn tactical gear and bloodied face. "Lies!" Declan boomed. He held up the satchel. "I have the proof of your treason right here, Lucian. You sold this alliance to the coalition." Lucian laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "Who are they going to believe, Declan? The stable leader who has been managing the packs while you play vigilante, or the man who broke into his own home with an armed team and a rankless Omega tart?" Lucian looked at the council. "He's unwell. He's dangerous. I am forced for the safety of the Alliance to relieve him of command." "You aren't relieving me of anything." Declan threw the satchel to the nearest Alpha, the elder of the Ironwood pack. "Read it." Lucian's smile faltered. "Kill them," he ordered his mercenaries. The guns raised. "Wait!" Sophie screamed. Her voice, usually so quiet, cracked like a whip through the room. She stepped away from Declan, walking toward Lucian. "Sophie, get back!" Declan yelled. "You think you've won, Lucian?" Sophie said, her voice trembling but loud. "Because you have the guns. Because you have the lies." She stopped 10 feet from him. She inhaled deeply. "But you're scared," she said. "I can smell it. It's rolling off you like sweat. You're terrified because the coalition enforcers are late, and you're terrified of him." She pointed at Declan. Lucian sneered. "Shut up, bitch. And I smell something else," Sophie said, her nose twitching. She looked at the mercenaries surrounding Lucian. She looked at their boots. "You didn't just plan to take over. You planned a purge." She looked up at the glass ceiling of the atrium. "Accelerant, not just gasoline this time. Something chemical. C4 residue on the structural supports." The alphas in the room muttered nervously. They looked up. "He was going to blow the building," Sophie said, turning to the council. "With all of you inside once you voted. He'd blame it on Declan's terrorism and rule the ashes with the coalition." Lucian's face went chalk white. The lie had been exposed not by documents, but by the undeniable truth of scent. "She's lying," Lucian screamed, pulling a handgun from his waistband. But the doubt was sown. The mercenaries looked uneasy. The alphas were standing up. Lucian pointed the gun at Sophie. "I'll kill you first." The roar that came from Declan shook the glass walls. He didn't just shift. He exploded into his wolf form faster than anyone had ever seen. A massive black wolf, bigger than any other, launched itself across the atrium. Lucian fired. The bullet grazed Declan's shoulder, but it didn't slow him down. Declan slammed into Lucian, carrying them both through the massive plate glass window. They fell out onto Obsidian Ridge, 50 feet below, disappearing into the swirling snow and the darkness of the storm. The crash of shattering glass seemed to echo for an eternity before the howling wind reclaimed the room. In the atrium, time stalled. The alphas of the council stood frozen, staring at the jagged hole where their king and his betrayer had vanished into the storm. Then the spell broke. "Secure the room." Bennett's voice cracked like a whip, snapping the wolf guard out of their shock. The mercenaries, realizing their paymaster had just plummeted 50 feet onto granite, looked at each other. The fight drained out of them instantly. Weapons clattered to the marble floor as hands went up in surrender. The elder alphas, enraged by the revelation of the explosives above their heads, began to advance on the remaining traitors. But Sophie didn't stay to watch the justice or the vengeance. She was already running. She sprinted for the service stairwell, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs that drowned out the sirens now wailing through the estate. She burst out onto the lower terrace, the blizzard hitting her with the force of a physical blow. The cold was agonizing, biting through her borrowed fatigues, but she felt none of it. All she could feel was the terrifying void in the pack bond where Declan's presence should be. "Declan!" She screamed, the name torn from her throat. The wind swallowed her cry. Sophie scrambled down the icy rocks leading to Obsidian Ridge. The stones were slick with sleet, and twice she fell, scraping her palms raw, but she clawed her way back up, driven by a desperation she had never known. She reached the plateau. The pristine white snow was marred by a violent swathe of disturbed earth and crimson stains. She found Lucian first. The usurper lay twisted in a snowdrift, his body broken and still. The fall had ended his ambition, leaving him staring blindly up at the storm he had tried to weaponize. Sophie stumbled past him, her eyes searching the gloom. "Declan!" A low, wet whine answered her. 10 yards away, near the precipice, a massive black shape lay huddled in the snow. The Alpha King's wolf form was barely rising and falling with breath. His fur, usually sleek and midnight black, was matted with blood, and a deep gash ran along his flank where glass or claw had found its mark. Sophie fell to her knees beside the beast, her hands hovering over him, terrified to cause more pain. "I'm here," she sobbed, the tears freezing instantly on her cheeks. "I'm here, Declan. Please just breathe." The great wolf opened his eyes. The gold within them was dim, clouded with pain, but as they locked onto hers, a flicker of recognition ignited. He didn't have the strength to stand. Instead, a shudder racked his massive frame. The sound of bones shifting and snapping sickeningly filled the air, the brutal, ugly reality of the shift. Steam rose from his body as the fur receded, revealing human skin battered by the fall and the fight. Moments later, Declan Mercer lay naked and shivering in the snow, his body a map of bruises and lacerations. He coughed a harsh, rattling sound and turned his head toward her. Sophie immediately stripped off her heavy jacket and draped it over him, tucking it tight against his freezing skin. She pulled his head into her lap, stroking his wet hair, trying to transfer every ounce of her warmth into him. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You jumped." Declan's lips twitched in a ghost of a smile. He reached up his hand, shaking violently, and cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a frozen tear. "Did we win?" He rasped, his voice barely audible over the wind. Sophie looked back toward the estate where lights were flickering back on, signaling the end of the coup. "Yes. Bennett has the floor. The council saw everything. They know about the poison, the explosives, the betrayal. It's over Declan." He closed his eyes, letting out a long, ragged exhale of relief. "Good. Because I don't think I can fight a bear again tonight." Sophie let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his. In that moment, the bond between them, which had been a tentative thread, snapped into place like a steel cable. It wasn't just gratitude or attraction anymore. It was a soul-deep circuit, an unbreakable tether that warmed her from the inside out. "Now," Declan murmured, fighting to keep his eyes open, "about that official mating ceremony. I promise it will be warmer than this. Shut up and stay alive." She kissed him, then a desperate, searing seal of their promise, ignoring the blood and the ice. "That's an order, Alpha." 1 week later, the grand ballroom of the Oakhaven Hotel was transformed. The scent of fear and trepidation that had choked the air during the winter solstice was gone, replaced by the rich aroma of pine roasting meat and a palpable sense of reverence. The hierarchy of the Midwest Alliance had gathered again, but the seating chart had been decimated. The old, rigid lines between the powerful and the weak had been blurred. Declan stood at the dais. He wore a fresh charcoal suit, though he moved with a slight stiffness, and a jagged healing scar was visible just above his collar, a permanent reminder of the night he almost died. Bennett stood to his right, looking tired but victorious, the undisputed second. The room went silent as Declan approached the microphone. "We almost lost everything." Declan's deep voice resonated, reaching the back corners of the hall without effort. "Not to an army, but to a rot from within. We were so obsessed with rank, with lineage, and with power that we became blind to the truth." He paused, his golden eyes scanning the crowd. "I was saved not by a warrior or an elder or a diplomat," he continued. "I was saved by someone the world told me didn't matter, someone who saw what we missed and smelled what we ignored." He turned toward the velvet curtain to his left and held out his hand. "Come out, Sophie." Sophie Wren stepped into the light. She wasn't wearing the black uniform of a servant. She wore a gown of deep emerald green velvet, that hugged her frame, bringing out the fire in her hazel eyes. Her hair was swept up, exposing her neck, where the fresh mating mark lay a symbol of the king's claim, and her claim on him. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, the old instinct to hide flaring up. Then she met Declan's gaze. He wasn't looking at her like a king looks at a subject. He was looking at her like a drowning man looks at air. She lifted her chin, inhaled the scent of the room, noting the nervousness, the curiosity and the awe, and took his hand. Declan pulled her to his side, interlacing their fingers. "This is Sophie Wren," Declan announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "She is my mate, and she is your queen. From this day forward, let it be known in this alliance, no wolf is invisible. We will listen to every voice, no matter how quiet the whisper." The applause began with Bennett, a slow, rhythmic clap, and then swept through the room like wildfire. As the cheers rose, Sophie squeezed Declan's hand. The Alpha King squeezed back, anchoring her. She had walked into this room a ghost, but she would leave it a legend. Wow. Talk about a baptism by fire. From a forgotten Omega to the Queen of the Midwest Alliance, Sophie Wren's story is proof that true power isn't just about brute strength. It's about courage, intuition, and standing up when everyone else is kneeling. Declan Mercer might be the Alpha King, but we all know who really saved the kingdom that night on Obsidian Ridge. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of the werewolf packs, smash that like button, it really helps the channel out. Let me know in the comments, do you think Lucian got what he deserved, or was he just a pawn in a bigger game? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story from the shadows. Until next time, keep your senses sharp.